Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive demographic shift that is literally reshaping Africa's most populous nation. We're talking about a phenomenon that's stripping Nigeria of its brightest minds, but at the same time, sparking this huge, crucial conversation about how to rebuild the country from the ground up. It's an absolutely fascinating story of frustration, survival, and ultimately potential. Let's get right into it. So let's start by defining exactly what we're looking at here. The word Japa, it's a Yoruba word that simply translates to depart or move away. But lately, it's evolved into what researchers and the International Journal of Sustainable Development Research are calling the Japa syndrome. Basically, this is a mass exodus of highly skilled youth and professionals who are just feeling completely disillusioned and are leaving Nigeria every single day to find opportunities abroad. This isn't just some passing trend, it's a profound socioeconomic reality.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll get the Japa syndrome explained. Then, we'll dive into the drivers behind this exodus, followed by the regional security crisis. After that, we'll look at economic reforms, efforts to reclaim the oil sector, and finally, how to potentially turn this massive drain into a gain.
All right, Section 1, the Japa syndrome explained, and understanding this mass exodus. Now, human migration is obviously as old as humanity itself, but the sheer scale of the current Japa wave in Nigeria, it's totally unprecedented. The academic term for it is human capital flight, which is really just the mass relocation of a highly qualified labor force. But here's a really harsh, kind of surprising reality from our sources. Many skilled Nigerian professionals who leave, especially those going without the right documentation, end up taking what researchers call 3D jobs. That stands for difficult, dirty, and dangerous. The irony is pretty staggering when you think about it. The very hardship they're trying to flee at home is often just replaced by severe everyday struggles in Europe, North America, or even other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Moving on to Section 2, drivers of the exodus, and specifically, the push factors. When we look at migration theory, specifically Ernst Georg Ravenstein's law of migration, we always look at the push and the pull factors. So what is pushing all these talented Nigerians out? Well, listen to the sheer scale of the economic challenge we're dealing with here, 33.3%. According to the data, between 2017 and 2021, the unemployment rate among active job seekers in Nigeria absolutely skyrocketed to a third of the workforce. Think about that for a second. When 1 in 3 people, and we're talking about massive numbers of recent university grads here, simply can't find jobs to sustain themselves, the pressure to look beyond the country's borders becomes immense. And then there's inflation. Current International Monetary Fund data projects an average consumer price inflation rate of 16% for 2026. I mean, think about what a 16% jump does to your grocery bill, right? Or your rent. When the cost of living rapidly outpaces your earning potential, even folks who do have jobs just watch their purchasing power completely evaporate. It essentially forces young professionals into a corner, pushing them to seek economies where their hard work actually translates into a sustainable livelihood. But it's really not just the economy. It's the system itself. Academic analyses of the Japa syndrome consistently point to perceived governance issues. And there's this poignant quote from the late, great Chinua Achebe that just hits the nail on the head. He said, "Nothing is wrong with Nigeria's land. The problem is leadership." Researchers argue that years of perceived corruption, nepotism, and a failure to build lasting infrastructure have left citizens feeling totally neglected. It's driving the youth to take their talents to places where they feel the system actually works for them. That brings us to Section 3, the regional security crisis and the broader instability in the Sahel. You see, economic woes are one thing, but physical safety, that is another entirely. Widespread insecurity has become a massive push factor that is directly threatening lives and livelihoods. Listen to this staggering number, 5,820. That is the number of political violence incidents mapped in Nigeria in the year 2020 alone, according to an analysis by The Guardian. The sheer volume of violence has turned Nigeria into a regional hotspot for insecurity, severely impacting everything from freedom of movement to agricultural stability. And these threats are incredibly complex, as outlined by organizations like CDD West Africa and Freedom House. We're seeing the ongoing Boko Haram insurgency and rampant kidnappings. We're seeing deadly clashes over land and resources between farmers and Fulani pastoralists, especially as climate change continues to degrade northern grasslands. Add to that the rise of military populism in the neighboring Sahel region and even coordinated digital disinformation campaigns. These online campaigns actively exploit religious and ethnic divides to deliberately foster distrust among the people. It is a really heavy, multifaceted burden for the population to carry. All right, moving into Section 4, economic reforms and stabilization. This is all about creating the pull. Because this story isn't just about the push, right? It's also about the pull. If Nigeria wants to actually stop this exodus, it has to create the macroeconomic conditions that make people want to stay. And to be fair, there are real efforts underway. If you look at the 2026 real GDP growth forecasts, the IMF is projecting a solid 4.1% growth, while the Nigerian Economic Summit Group is even more optimistic, projecting 5.5%. The NESG notes that Nigeria has already achieved some meaningful, albeit fragile, stabilization gains. The main goal right now is to accelerate that sustainable growth. But it takes more than just economic data to turn things around. There's also the vital work of civil society. Organizations like the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, or PLAC, are really stepping up here. They focus heavily on strengthening democratic governance and getting citizens engaged with state institutions. In plain terms, they are working on the ground to build real trust between the people and the government. And that trust is absolutely critical if you ever want to implement long-lasting policy and tax reforms. Now for Section 5, reclaiming the oil sector and securing the pipelines. So to fund all these big economic reforms we just talked about, Nigeria needs its primary revenue engine running completely smoothly. And that means oil. But that requires tackling the massive issue of crude oil theft and pipeline vandalism. Stakeholders have backed a highly coordinated approach to fix this exact problem. Step 1 involves deploying private firms like Tantata Security Services. Step 2, ensure those firms coordinate very closely with official government forces. Step 3 is enhancing local intelligence sharing. And finally, Step 4, use this combined network to drastically curb the vandalism. Forensic experts warn that pulling this off requires absolute discipline and trust, but it's essential. And the results of this coordinated security effort? Well, they're tangible. Thanks to these enhanced surveillance frameworks, crude oil output has recently rebounded to a massive 1.7 million barrels per day. That is a huge win for the country. It directly enhances national revenue and gives the government the actual financial muscle it needs to meet its public obligations. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, turning drain into gain and the concept of Japa. So how does Nigeria take all this economic and security stabilization and use it to actually reverse the Japa trend? Academics are proposing a pretty powerful shift in mindset. We are talking about moving from Japa, which, as we know, means brain drain, labor shortages, and losing your best workers, to Japa-da. Japa-da literally means returning home. It's the concept of brain gain. It envisions proactive, patriotic citizens returning from the diaspora, bringing back advanced technology, global innovation, and vital capital to actively drive Nigeria's economic growth forward. It's a real game changer if they can pull it off. Okay, so how do we make Japa a reality? Researchers have outlined some very actionable systemic solutions. First, you have to tackle the cultural dislocation by fostering a strong national identity, maybe through revamped civic and social studies education. Second, the government absolutely has to create a highly conducive, stable environment for investors. Third, insecurity has to be addressed head-on. Simply put, people are not going to return if they don't feel safe, right? And finally, there must be a genuine, highly visible effort to end nepotism and completely rebuild the credibility of the public institutions. Which leaves us with this vital, overarching question derived directly from our sources today. How do we actively encourage Japa? How do we bring back skilled Nigerians, from the doctors practicing in the UK to the tech experts innovating in the US, to tackle these current challenges? It really is the defining question for Nigeria's socioeconomic future. Think about that as we wrap up today's explainer. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the world around you.